You're standing at the altar about to say, "I do" to someone who doesn't make your heart skip a beat, when suddenly you realize your entire life has been a lie. That's exactly what happened to Clara when she discovered that her perfect wedding was actually part of a deadly conspiracy, designed to destroy the one man she'd ever truly loved. What would you do if you found out that everyone you trusted had betrayed you? That your own family had sold you out to save themselves? That the man you were about to marry was planning to use you as bait in a murder plot? Clara did something most people never have the courage to do. She ran, straight down that aisle, wedding dress and all, into a storm that would change everything. Welcome back to Infinite Stories, where every tale has the power to transform your perspective on life. I'm so glad you're here with us today, because what you're about to experience isn't just another story. It's a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about love, betrayal, and the courage to fight for what truly matters. Now, before we dive into today's incredible tale, if you're new to our channel or if you've been enjoying our stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss the powerful narratives we share here at Infinite Stories, each one designed to inspire, captivate, and maybe even change how you see the world. But here's where this story gets really interesting. Sometimes, when you think you're running away from love, you're actually running straight toward it. And sometimes, the person you least expect becomes your greatest protector, your fiercest ally, and your truest partner in a battle for survival. This isn't just another romance story. This is about what happens when ordinary people discover extraordinary courage, when love becomes a weapon against evil, and when two broken hearts find a way to heal each other while fighting for their lives. You're about to witness a story of betrayal and redemption, of corporate conspiracy and personal vendetta, of a woman who found her voice and a man who remembered his power. A story that will make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and what it really means to fight for what matters. So buckle up, because Clara's journey from runaway bride to fearless woman is about to teach us all something profound about the difference between settling for what others expect and fighting for what you truly deserve. Picture this: you're standing at the altar, heart pounding, about to say "I do" to someone who doesn't make your soul sing. That's exactly where Clara found herself, staring into Damien's cold eyes while her mind screamed one name: Alexander. The same Alexander who'd crushed her heart just weeks before, leaving her feeling like damaged goods. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes it gives you the perfect foundation to rebuild. Clara couldn't take another second of this charade. She hiked up her wedding dress, kicked off those ridiculously expensive heels, and bolted. Just ran straight down that aisle like her life depended on it. Because honestly, it kinda did. The guests gasped, Damien's face turned crimson, and Clara's parents looked mortified. But she didn't care. She was done being the perfect daughter, the obedient fiancée, the woman who always did what others expected. For the first time in forever, she was doing something purely for herself. Now, running in a wedding dress isn't exactly practical. The thing was massive, all lace and beading that cost more than most people's cars. But adrenaline's a hell of a drug, and Clara managed to make it several blocks before reality hit. She was alone, on the streets, in a wedding dress with nowhere to go. That's when she spotted the Hotel Marquis, one of those fancy old buildings downtown with the classic overhang. Perfect shelter from both the rain that had started sprinkling and the chaos she'd left behind. She ducked under there, trying to catch her breath and figure out her next move. But life's got this twisted sense of timing, doesn't it? Just when you think you've hit your lowest point, the universe decides to show you there's a whole other level of crazy waiting. Clara was still adjusting her dress when she heard voices, familiar voices. Damien's voice. "She'll come crawling back," Damien was saying, and Clara could practically hear the smirk in his tone. Women like her always do. Too scared to actually make it on their own. Clara pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. She knew she should leave, but something kept her frozen in place. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was masochism, but she stayed put and listened. That's when she heard the second voice, a voice that should have been impossible. A voice belonging to a dead man. You sure about that? Ryan asked, and Clara's blood turned to ice. Ryan was supposed to be 6 feet under. Everyone knew the story. Tragic accident, closed casket funeral, the whole 9 yards. Yet here he was, very much alive, and apparently very much involved in whatever sick game was being played. The girl's more useful than you think, Ryan continued. This whole wedding charade? Brilliant move. Rebuilds your reputation, makes you look stable, responsible. But more importantly, it gives us the perfect bait. Clara's mind raced. Bait for what? Alexander won't be able to resist playing hero, Damien replied, and Clara's heart stopped completely. He's always had a soft spot for damsels in distress, especially this particular damsel. The pieces started clicking together like a horrifying puzzle. The sudden proposal from Damien, the way her parents had pushed so hard for this marriage, the timing of it all, right after Alexander had rejected her. None of it had been coincidence. Once he shows up to save her, Ryan's voice took on this sinister edge that made Clara's skin crawl. We'll be ready. That bastard's been hiding long enough. Time to finish what we started. Clara had to bite her lip to keep from gasping out loud. They were talking about killing Alexander, using her as bait to lure him out so they could murder him. And somehow, impossibly, her own family was mixed up in this nightmare. Your parents played their part perfectly, Ryan continued, confirming Clara's worst fears. A little financial pressure, a few threats about the family business, and suddenly they're all for this marriage. Amazing what people will do when their livelihood's on the line. That's when it all made sense. Her parents' sudden enthusiasm for Damien, the way they dismissed her concerns, the pressure to marry quickly. They hadn't been trying to secure her future. They'd been selling her out to save themselves. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow could have. Her own family had basically gift-wrapped her and handed her over to be used as ammunition against the one man she'd ever truly loved. The man they were planning to kill. Clara knew she had 2 choices. She could go home, pretend she never heard any of this, and let whatever was going to happen just happen. Or she could do something about it. For the first time in her life, she could actually fight for something that mattered. The rain was picking up, but Clara didn't care. She had somewhere to be, someone to warn, and for the first time since Alexander had broken her heart, she had a purpose that went beyond her own pain. Finding Alexander wasn't going to be easy. The man had basically vanished after their last conversation. But Clara had determination on her side now, and something even more powerful, the knowledge that someone she cared about was in real danger. As she stepped back out into the storm, wedding dress and all, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, not for herself, not for some fairy tale ending, but for the chance to do something that actually mattered. Something that might save the life of the man who'd unknowingly become the target of an elaborate and deadly trap. Here's the thing about trying to be a hero when you're still wearing a wedding dress. It's a lot harder than the movies make it look. Clara had been searching for Alexander for hours, hitting up every place she could think of where he might be hiding. Coffee shops, his old office building, even that little bookstore where they'd had their first real conversation. But the man had vanished like smoke. She should have known something was off when that black SUV started following her around the 3rd block. Should have trusted that little voice in her head that kept screaming danger. But Clara was running on pure adrenaline and desperation, and sometimes that makes you do stupid things. Like walking down a deserted alley because you think you heard someone call your name. That's when they grabbed her. 3 guys, built like they spent more time in the gym than anywhere else. And they moved with the kind of efficiency that told Clara this wasn't their first rodeo. One second she was scanning the street for any sign of Alexander. The next, she was being stuffed into the back of that SUV with a hand clamped over her mouth. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sweetheart, one of them growled, and Clara's blood ran cold. These weren't random kidnappers looking for a payday. These were professionals. Ryan's Professionals. The ride felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only 20 minutes before they pulled up to this abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. One of those places that screams, "Bad things happen here" in every horror movie you've ever seen. But this wasn't a movie, and Clara was starting to realize just how deep in trouble she really was. They dragged her inside, and that's when she saw him, Ryan, very much alive. Very much not the broken man she'd heard about at his supposed funeral. He looked different. Older, sure, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something cold and calculating that made Clara's skin crawl. "Well, well," he said, circling her like a predator, sizing up its prey. The runaway bride herself. "You know, Clara, you made this so much easier by disappearing on your own. Saved us the trouble of having to snatch you from the wedding." They'd tied her to a chair, because of course they had, and Clara tested the ropes while trying to keep her face. Neutral, tight, professional knots. These guys knew what they were doing. "What do you want with me?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Sometimes asking the obvious question buys you time to think. Ryan laughed, and it was the kind of sound that made you want to check all your locks twice before going to bed. "Oh, sweetheart, you're not the prize. You're just the bait. See, your boyfriend Alexander thinks he's so clever, hiding away like some kind of ghost. But every man has his weakness, and you—" He reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You're his." Clara jerked her head away. "He won't come. We're not together anymore." "Sure you're not," Ryan said with that same cold smile. "That's why you were running around town in a wedding dress looking for him. That's why you fled your own wedding the second someone mentioned his name. Face it, honey, you're still crazy about the guy, and damn it, he wasn't wrong. Even after everything, even after Alexander had basically told her she wasn't good enough, Clara couldn't get him out of her system. It was pathetic, really. But Ryan was counting on that pathetic little piece of her heart. "He doesn't even know I'm missing," Clara tried, but even she didn't believe it. "Oh, he will," Ryan said, pulling out his phone. "Amazing what social media can accomplish these days. One little video of you tied up and scared, and every news outlet in the city will be running the story. Alexander Cole's mystery woman in danger. He won't be able to resist playing the hero." That's when Clara understood the real genius of Ryan's plan. He wasn't just using her as bait. He was using her as a public spectacle. Alexander wouldn't be able to hide anymore, not with the whole world watching. He'd have to come out of whatever hole he'd been hiding in, and when he did— "You're going to kill him," she said quietly. Ryan's smile widened. "Eventually. But first I want him to suffer a little. Want him to know what it feels like to lose everything the way I did." Clara wanted to ask what Alexander had supposedly done to him, but she had a feeling she already knew. Some business deal gone wrong, some betrayal real or imagined. Men like Ryan always had their sob stories, their justifications for becoming monsters. The waiting was the worst part. Ryan had sent his little video, and now they were just sitting there watching the clock tick by. Clara's wrists were starting to chafe from the ropes, and her wedding dress was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. But she kept her mouth shut and her ears open, trying to pick up anything that might help her figure out how to get out of this mess. That's when she heard it. The sound of footsteps on concrete, purposeful and steady. Too steady for someone who was scared or uncertain. Ryan heard it too, because he straightened up with that same predatory smile. "Right on schedule," he murmured, gesturing to his men. "Places, everyone." The warehouse doors burst open, and Clara's heart stopped completely. It was Alexander, but not the Alexander she remembered. This wasn't the broken, defeated man who'd pushed her away weeks ago. This version of Alexander moved like he owned the world, shoulders back, jaw set, eyes scanning the warehouse with the kind of tactical precision that spoke of training most people never got. "Let her go." "Ryan!" he called out, his voice carrying across the warehouse with an authority that made Clara shiver. "This is between you and me," Ryan laughed. "Oh, Alexander, still trying to be the noble hero, I see. How's that worked out for you so far?" But Alexander wasn't looking at Ryan anymore. His eyes had found Clara, and for just a second, She saw something flicker across his face. Relief, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'm okay," she called out, because she needed him to know that, needed him to focus on the danger instead of worrying about her. That's when Ryan's men moved. 3 of them, coming at Alexander from different angles, and Clara's heart sank because no matter how different he seemed, it was still 3 against 1. She shouldn't have worried. Alexander moved like liquid lightning, ducking the first guy's swing and coming up with an uppercut that dropped him instantly. The second guy got a knee to the solar plexus that left him gasping on the floor. And the third guy got to experience what it felt like to have his own momentum used against him as Alexander sent him flying into a stack of shipping crates. It was over in less than 30 seconds. And Clara was staring at a man she didn't recognize. This wasn't the quiet, reserved businessman she'd fallen for. This was someone who'd been trained to fight, trained to win, and trained to protect what mattered to him. "Impressive," Ryan said, and Clara could hear the grudging respect in his voice. "But you always were full of surprises." Alexander was already moving toward Clara, working on the ropes that held her to the chair. His hands were steady, sure, and when he looked at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, meant just for her. "I should never have let you go." Before Clara could respond, they heard the sirens. Police, ambulances, the whole cavalry coming to clean up the mess. Ryan was on the ground, hands zip-tied behind his back, looking like he couldn't quite believe how quickly his perfect plan had fallen apart. As Alexander helped Clara to her feet, she realized something had fundamentally changed. Not just in him, but in the whole situation. The man who'd rescued her wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't running from his past or his power. He was stepping back into the light, and something told Clara that the world was about to remember exactly who Alexander Cole really was. The question was, what kind of storm was that going to unleash? You know what's funny about power? It's not really about the corner office or the fancy title or even the bank account. Real power is about truth and the courage to wield it when everything's on the line. Alexander was about to learn that lesson firsthand. As he walked through the glass doors of Cole Enterprises for the first time in months, the building looked exactly the same. All polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that screamed successful corporation. But something felt different. Maybe it was the way the security guards did a double-take when they saw him, or how conversations stopped mid-sentence as he passed by. Word travels fast in the corporate world, and Alexander's very public return from the dead was already making waves. Clara walked beside him, still in that ridiculous wedding dress, because, honestly, when you're about to blow up someone's entire world, what you're wearing becomes pretty irrelevant. She'd cleaned up as much as possible, but there was no hiding what she'd been through. The torn lace, the smudged makeup, the determined set of her jaw. She looked like a warrior who'd just survived her first battle and was ready for the next one. "You sure about this?" Clara asked quietly as they stepped into the elevator. The brass buttons gleamed like they'd been polished that morning, which they probably had. Some things never change, even when your life's falling apart. Alexander's reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls, and for a second, he barely recognized himself. This wasn't the broken man who'd crawled away months ago. This was someone who'd remembered what he was capable of, someone who'd been reminded that some things were worth fighting for. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied. And he meant it. The elevator dinged softly as they passed each floor, each number lighting up like a countdown to Judgment Day. Floor 15. That's where the executive conference room was, where the board of directors would be gathering for what they thought was just another emergency meeting. Alexander had called it himself, using channels and connections that most people had forgotten he still had. Amazing how quickly people assume you're powerless just because you disappear for a while. The elevator doors opened with that soft whoosh sound that expensive buildings always have, and Alexander felt something click into place inside his chest. This was his building, his company, his legacy, and he was about to take it all back. The conference room was exactly as he remembered, that massive mahogany table that cost more than most people's cars, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's rent. 12 board members were already seated, looking confused and slightly annoyed at being called in on such short notice. Alexander recognized most of them, though a few faces were new. Ryan's influence, no doubt. "Gentlemen, ladies," Alexander said as he walked in, Clara right beside him. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room, which was saying something considering how thick the carpeting was. Margaret Wells, the longest-serving board member, was the first to find her voice. "Alexander, but how? We were told you were—" She trailed off, probably realizing how ridiculous it sounded to say, "We thought you were dead," in a business meeting. Dead? Alexander supplied helpfully, taking his seat at the head of the table like he'd never left. "Yeah, I heard that rumor too. Funny thing about rumors, they're usually started by people who have something to gain from spreading them." He opened the briefcase he'd brought, not his old one, but a new one he'd picked up specifically for this moment. Sometimes symbolism matters, and Alexander wanted everything about today to represent a fresh start. The documents inside, though, those represented the end of the line for some very bad people. "I know you all have questions," Alexander continued, spreading papers across the table with practiced efficiency, "and I'm going to answer them. But first, I want you to take a look at these." The first document was a contract, one that supposedly bore Alexander's signature, agreeing to a merger that would have essentially dissolved Cole Enterprises into Ryan's holding company. Only problem was, Alexander had never seen that contract before in his life. The signature was good, really good, but not perfect. "This is the document Ryan used to convince several of you that I'd agreed to step down voluntarily," Alexander explained, watching their faces as recognition dawned. "Notice anything interesting about the signature?" David Chen, the company's longtime attorney, leaned forward to study it more closely. His face went pale as he spotted what Alexander was pointing out. "The date," he said quietly. "This is dated 3 days after the accident that supposedly left me in a coma," Alexander confirmed. "Pretty impressive that I managed to sign a complex merger agreement while unconscious, don't you think?" But that was just the appetizer. The main course was a series of financial records that showed money flowing from Ryan's accounts into various shell companies, which then made payments to Damien's construction firm. Payments that lined up perfectly with the timeline of the accident that had nearly killed Alexander. "Ryan didn't just fake my death," Alexander said, his voice taking on an edge that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "He tried to make it real. The brake failure in my car wasn't mechanical failure, it was sabotage. And these payments prove it." The room erupted in shocked murmurs and whispered conversations, but Alexander wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and connected it to the conference room's sound system with the kind of smooth efficiency that showed. He'd planned every detail of this moment, but my personal favorite piece of evidence, he said, finger hovering over the play button, is this recording. Taken just this morning, actually, outside the Grand View Hotel. Ryan's voice filled the room, crystal clear and absolutely damning. Every word of his conversation with Damien, every casual admission of conspiracy, every detail of their plan to use Clara as bait. The board members listened in stunned silence as the truth unfolded in real time, their faces ranging from shock to disgust to something that looked like fear. When the recording ended, the silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Margaret cleared her throat and looked around the table at her fellow board members. "I think it's safe to say," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "that we owe you an apology, Alexander, and our full support in whatever legal action you choose to pursue." The vote was unanimous. Alexander Cole was officially reinstated as CEO of Cole Enterprises, effective immediately. Ryan's appointments to the board were rescinded, his access to company accounts frozen, and law enforcement was contacted to begin criminal proceedings. But even as Alexander savored the sweet taste of vindication, he knew this was only round one. Ryan wasn't the type to go quietly into the night, and Damien had too much invested in this conspiracy to just walk away. They'd regroup, they'd plan, and they'd come back swinging harder than ever as the board members filed out. Shaking Alexander's hand and offering their congratulations, Clara caught his eye from across the room. She was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since he'd known her. But there was something else in her expression, a kind of steely determination that told him she understood exactly what they were up against. The truth was out there now, spreading through the business world like wildfire. Alexander Cole was alive, he was back, and he wasn't going down without a fight. But if there's one thing life teaches you, it's that winning the first battle doesn't mean you've won the war. And something told Alexander that Ryan and Damien were just getting started. Here's the thing about cornered animals. They don't just roll over and play dead. When Ryan and Damien realized their perfect plan had blown up in their faces, they didn't retreat. They doubled down, and that's when things got really ugly. Clara was having coffee in Alexander's penthouse when her phone started buzzing like crazy. Text after text, missed call after missed call. Social media notifications pinging nonstop. She'd been trying to ignore it, honestly, after everything they'd been through. The last thing she wanted was to deal with whatever drama was exploding online. But Alexander noticed the way her shoulders tensed with each buzz, the way she kept glancing at her phone like it was a ticking bomb. "What's going on?" he asked, setting down his own coffee and moving to sit beside her on the couch. Clara's face went pale as she finally opened her phone. The video was everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even the local news websites. Someone had filmed her dramatic exit from the wedding, and it wasn't exactly flattering. The angle made her look unhinged, desperate. The caption that kept getting shared made it even worse. "Runaway bride can't handle commitment, leaves groom at altar for mystery man." But that wasn't the worst part. Someone had dug up old photos of her and Alexander together, grainy paparazzi shots from months ago when they'd been secretly dating. The narrative they were spinning was brutal. Gold digging. Woman jumps ship the second she finds a richer target. Manipulative, calculating. A heartbreaker who destroys lives for fun. "They're making me look like a monster," Clara whispered, scrolling through comment after comment of strangers calling her every name in the book. The internet can be a cruel place, but this felt targeted, coordinated, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Alexander took the phone from her hands, his jaw tightening as he read through the posts. "This is Ryan's work. He's trying to turn public opinion against you, make you look like the villain so that when something happens to you, people won't care as much." That's when Clara's phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it anyway. "Enjoying your 15 minutes of fame." Ryan's voice was sickeningly sweet, like poisoned honey. "You know, I really didn't expect you to make it so easy for me. Running away in a wedding dress? The footage is pure gold." Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "What do you want?" "Oh, sweetheart, I want lots of things. But right now, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is just the beginning. Every embarrassing moment, every bad decision, every skeleton in your closet, it's all gonna come out. I'm gonna make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of person you really are." The line went dead, and Clara stared at the phone like it had personally betrayed her. Alexander was already on his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with the kind of focused intensity she'd learned to recognize. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Damage control," he replied without looking up. "And return fire." That's when the second wave hit. Clara's phone started buzzing again, but this time it was different. Bank notifications, credit alerts. Someone was systematically attacking her financial life, closing accounts, tanking her credit score, making it look like she was in massive debt. The same thing was happening to Alexander's personal accounts, but the real target was Cole Enterprises. Alexander's phone was ringing non-stop. Board members, investors, clients. Someone was spreading rumors about the company's financial stability, making it look like Alexander's return was actually a desperate attempt to save a sinking ship. Stock prices were dropping by the minute. "They're good," Alexander admitted, though he didn't sound particularly worried. "This is a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. Financial, social, personal. They're trying to isolate us, make us panic, turn us against each other." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Is it working?" Alexander's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. "Well, they're definitely causing damage. But here's what Ryan doesn't understand about me. I don't just know how to run a company. I know how to fight dirty when I have to." What happened next was like watching a master chess player work. Alexander didn't just defend against the attacks, he turned them into weapons. Every false rumor about Cole Enterprises he countered with verifiable facts and figures that made the company look stronger than ever. Every fake story about Clara he had debunked by real journalists who owed him favors from years past. But the most brilliant move was what he did to the financial attack. Instead of just stopping the sabotage, Alexander traced it back to its source and then used that information to expose an entire network of shell companies and fake accounts that Ryan had been using for years. By the time he was done, Ryan's whole operation was laid bare for law enforcement to see. "How did you do that so fast?" Clara asked, watching the tide of public opinion shift in real time as the truth came out. Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've been preparing for this moment for months. You think hiding out after the accident was just about healing? I was learning, studying, understanding exactly how Ryan operates so that when the time came, I'd be ready." That's when the third wave hit, and this one was personal. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Just a photo." No words needed. It showed Alexander in a hospital bed, beaten and broken, machines keeping him alive. He looked fragile, vulnerable, nothing like the powerful man sitting beside her now, but attached to the photo was a message that made Clara's blood run cold. "This is what happens to people who get in my way. Leave him, or watch him end up like this again, permanently." Clara stared at the photo for a long moment, her hands trembling. She could feel Alexander watching her, waiting to see what she'd do. This was the moment Ryan was counting on, the moment fear would drive her away, leaving Alexander isolated and vulnerable. Instead, Clara deleted the message and set her phone aside. "Whatever you're thinking," she said quietly, "don't. I'm not going anywhere." Alexander's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper. Something that looked a lot like relief mixed with determination. "They're going to keep coming," he warned. "This photo, the threats, it's only going to get worse. Ryan won't stop until one of us breaks." Clara reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers with a certainty that surprised them both. "Then we better make sure we're stronger together than they are apart." That's when Alexander realized something that changed everything. He'd been thinking about this whole situation wrong. He'd been trying to protect Clara from the storm, when what he should have been doing was teaching her to dance in the rain with him. "You know what Ryan's biggest mistake was?" Alexander asked, pulling Clara closer. "What?" "He assumed our connection was a weakness, something he could exploit, something that would make us vulnerable." Alexander's smile was different now, not sharp or calculating, but warm and real. He never considered that it might be our greatest strength. As if on cue, both their phones started buzzing again. More attacks, more threats, more attempts to tear them apart. But this time, they faced it together side by side. And somehow, that made all the difference. The final battle was coming. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Alexander wasn't just ready for it, he was looking forward to it. You know that moment in every great story when the heroes finally stop running and decide to make their stand. That's exactly where Alexander and Clara found themselves, not because they were out of options, but because they'd finally realized they had more power together than they'd ever had apart. The plan they cooked up was brilliant in its simplicity. No more playing defense, no more reacting to Ryan and Damien's moves. It was time to control the narrative, and they were going to do it in the most public way possible. A press conference that would put everything on the table once and for all. Alexander had connections everywhere. Journalists who owed him favors, media outlets that still respected his name, even a few politicians who remembered when Cole Enterprises had helped fund their campaigns. When Alexander Cole calls a press conference after months of being presumed dead, the whole world pays attention. Clara spent the morning getting ready, and she chose her outfit like she was suiting up for battle. That navy blue dress wasn't just clothing, it was armor. Professional, confident, but with just enough vulnerability to remind people she was human. She wasn't going to hide behind Alexander's power or play the victim card. She was going to stand up there and own her story. "You sure about this?" Alexander asked as they rode the elevator up to the conference room. The building was crawling with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. Word had leaked that something big was about to go down. Clara straightened her shoulders and met his eyes in the reflection. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The conference room was packed. Cameras lined the back wall. Journalists filled every seat, and the energy in the room was electric. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just another corporate announcement. This was history in the making. Clara walked up to the podium first, and the room went dead silent. She'd been expecting the hostile stares, the whispered comments, the judgment. Social media had done its work well. Half the world thought she was a gold-digging manipulator who'd destroyed two men's lives for her own gain. But Clara didn't flinch. She looked straight into those cameras and spoke with the kind of clarity that comes from finally knowing exactly who you are. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Clara Martinez, and I'm here to tell you the truth about what's been happening in my life over the past few months. Not the version you've seen on social media, not the story that's been carefully crafted to make me look like a villain, but the real truth. She started from the beginning, the arranged marriage, the family pressure, the way she'd been manipulated into thinking she was doing the right thing. But she didn't paint herself as a helpless victim. She owned her mistakes, acknowledged the people she'd hurt, and explained how she'd discovered the conspiracy that had nearly gotten Alexander killed. "I'm not standing here asking for your sympathy," Clara continued, her voice getting stronger with every word. "I'm standing here because sometimes the truth is messy and complicated and doesn't fit into neat little sound bites. But it's still the truth, and it still matters." That's when Alexander stepped up to join her, and the room somehow got even quieter. The last time most of these people had seen him, he'd been broken and defeated. This version of Alexander commanded attention like he was born to it. "What Clara isn't telling you," Alexander said, taking the microphone, "is that her courage to speak up, her willingness to risk everything to warn me about what was coming, that's what saved my life. And not just once, but multiple times over the past few weeks." He nodded to his legal team, and they started distributing documents to the reporters. Financial records, email trails, recorded conversations, everything they'd been gathering for months, all laid out in black and white. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and absolutely damning. But the real showstopper was the video they played next. Security footage from the hotel where Clara had overheard Ryan and Damien's conversation, enhanced and cleaned up by the best tech experts Alexander's money could buy. Ryan's face was crystal clear as he discussed using Clara as bait. Damien's voice was unmistakable as he talked about rebuilding his reputation through marriage fraud. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were flashing, and somewhere in the back, Clara could hear someone on the phone already calling in the story to their editor. That's when the conference room doors burst open. Ryan stormed in with two of his goons, his face twisted with rage. Security tried to stop him, but he pushed through like a man with nothing left to lose. Which honestly he was. "You think this is over?" he screamed, pointing at Alexander. You think some doctored videos and fake documents are going to change anything? I've been planning this for years. The cameras were rolling, capturing every word, every wild gesture. Ryan was having a complete meltdown on live television, and he didn't even realize it. You destroyed my life, Ryan continued, spittle flying from his mouth. Everything I worked for, everything I built, you took it all away. So yeah, I tried to kill you, and I'd do it again. That's when one of his goons, the stupider one apparently, decided this was the perfect moment to rush the stage. He lunged toward Clara, probably thinking he could grab her and use her as leverage to get Ryan out of there. He didn't even make it halfway. Alexander moved like liquid lightning, intercepting the guy mid-charge and putting him on the ground so fast that half the room missed it. But the cameras didn't miss it, and neither did Ryan. In a moment of absolute insanity, Ryan pulled out a gun. The room exploded into chaos. People screaming, diving for cover, security shouting orders. But Ryan wasn't looking at any of them. His eyes were locked on Alexander with the kind of hatred that goes beyond reason. You want to play hero? Ryan snarled, pointing the weapon with shaking hands. Let's see how heroic you are. That's when he noticed the cameras. Every single one of them was still rolling, broadcasting live to news stations across the country. Millions of people were watching Ryan wave a gun around at a press conference, confessing to attempted murder while threatening to commit actual murder. The realization hit him like a freight train. His face went white, his hands started shaking worse, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Ryan looked genuinely scared. Security moved in fast, but Ryan was too rattled to resist. The gun fell from his hands like it was suddenly too heavy to hold, and he just stood there as they cuffed him, mumbling something about how it wasn't supposed to happen this way. Damien, who'd apparently been watching from the back of the room, tried to slip out in the chaos. But Alexander's security team was ready for that too. He made it about 10 feet before finding himself face down on the marble floor with zip ties around his wrists. As the police led both men away, Clara realized something profound had just happened. Not just the arrests, not just the public vindication, but something deeper. She'd stood up in front of the whole world, told her truth, and refused to be intimidated. She'd found her voice, and more importantly, she'd found her strength. The press conference ended with Ryan and Damien in handcuffs, their conspiracy exposed, their credibility destroyed, and their freedom gone. Justice wasn't just served. It was served with a side of poetic irony, considering they'd tried to destroy Alexander and Clara through public humiliation. As the room finally started to clear out, Clara looked around at the chaos. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, security tape marking off areas where evidence had been collected. It looked like a battlefield, which in a way it had been, but for the first time in months, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace, not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it head-on and walking away victorious. The war was over, and they'd won. But as Clara caught Alexander's eye across the room, she realized that winning was just the beginning. Now they had to figure out what came next, and somehow that felt like the most important part of all. Here's what nobody tells you about winning. Sometimes the real victory isn't getting your old life back, it's realizing you don't want it anymore. Alexander and Clara discovered this truth sitting in his penthouse the morning after Ryan and Damien's arrest. Watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and possibility, the phone had been ringing non-stop. Board members wanting Alexander back at Coal Enterprises, investors eager to throw money at whatever he touched next, headhunters calling with offers that would have made his younger self dizzy with ambition. But for the first time in his adult life, Alexander wasn't interested in any of it. What if we just didn't? Clara asked, curled up next to him on the couch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She was still wearing one of his oversized shirts, her hair messy from sleep, and Alexander thought she'd never looked more beautiful. Didn't what? Go back to the way things were. What if we did something completely different? That's when Alexander realized something that should have been obvious, but somehow hadn't been. He'd been fighting so hard to reclaim his old life that he'd forgotten to ask himself if he actually wanted it back. The corporate world, the endless meetings, the constant pressure to grow bigger and faster and stronger, none of that felt important anymore. "What would you want to do?" he asked, genuinely curious. Clara's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement he hadn't seen since, well, ever. "I've always dreamed of opening a bookstore. Somewhere cozy, with comfortable chairs and good coffee, where people can just exist without having to perform or impress anyone. Maybe call it Horizon, like a new beginning." Alexander could picture it perfectly, Clara surrounded by books, helping customers find exactly the story they needed, creating a little pocket of peace in the chaos of the world. It suited her in a way that being Damien's trophy wife never could have. "And you?" Clara asked. "What would make you happy?" That's when Alexander surprised himself. "I want to help people, real people, not just shareholders. Maybe start a small consulting firm, help family businesses, nonprofits, people who actually need the advice but can't afford the big corporate rates." They spent the next hour planning their escape from everything they'd thought they were supposed to want. And with each detail they discussed, Alexander felt lighter. No more boardroom politics, no more corporate backstabbing, no more measuring success by stock prices and quarterly reports. The transition wasn't seamless. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Alexander had to extract himself from dozens of legal obligations, and Clara had to figure out how to start a business when her credit was still recovering from Ryan's financial attacks. But they tackled each challenge together, and somehow that made even the boring stuff feel like an adventure. 6 months later, Horizon Cafe and Books opened its doors in a converted Victorian house on the quiet side of town. Clara had painted the walls warm yellow and filled every corner with carefully curated books, classics mixed with contemporary fiction, business guides sitting next to poetry collections, children's stories sharing space with memoirs that made you believe in second chances. Alexander's consulting practice operated out of a small office above the bookstore, and his first clients were exactly the kind of people he'd hoped to help. A family restaurant struggling to compete with chains, a non-profit trying to expand their community outreach, a group of local artists who wanted to turn their collective into a sustainable business. The money wasn't what they'd been used to, but it was enough. More importantly, it felt honest in a way that corporate profits never had. Every dollar they earned came from genuinely helping someone, from making the world a little bit better instead of just richer. Clara discovered she had a gift for creating community. The bookstore became a gathering place. Reading groups met on Tuesday evenings, local authors hosted signings on weekends, and every Thursday afternoon turned into impromptu storytelling sessions where customers shared tales that were funnier and more heartbreaking than anything on the bestseller lists. Alexander found himself looking forward to Monday mornings for the first time in his adult life. His clients trusted him, respected his advice, and actually listened when he warned them about the kind of corporate sharks he used to swim with. He was using his hard-earned cynicism to protect people instead of exploit them, and the difference felt revolutionary. It was on a Thursday evening in spring when Alexander realized he'd been carrying the ring around for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Clara was closing up the bookstore, humming something under her breath as she straightened the shelves with the kind of contentment that comes from loving what you do. "Want to take a walk?" he asked. Even though they both knew where they'd end up, the lake was their place now, a quiet spot about 10 minutes from town where they'd started going when the stress of rebuilding their lives got overwhelming. No cell service, no traffic noise, just water and trees and the kind of peace that money can't buy. Clara was skipping stones, trying to beat her personal record of 4 bounces, when Alexander dropped to one knee behind her. She turned around at exactly the right moment, and her gasp echoed across the water like music. "Clara Martinez," he said, and his voice was steady even though his heart was hammering. "You saved my life in more ways than I can count. Will you marry me? The ring wasn't the biggest or flashiest. They talked about that, about choosing substance over show. But it caught the sunset perfectly, and more importantly, it represented everything they'd chosen together. Authenticity over appearance. Love over convenience, building something real instead of just impressive. Yes, Clara said. And then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying and probably scaring the fish with all their noise. They got married on a Saturday in September, in the garden behind the bookstore. No fancy venue, no stressed-out wedding planner, no guest list designed to impress business contacts. Just the people who actually mattered. Alexander's few real friends. Clara's chosen family from the bookstore community. And yes, even Clara's parents. That reconciliation had been the hardest part of their new life. Clara's mother and father showed up at the bookstore one rainy afternoon, looking older and more fragile than Clara remembered. The apology took hours, with tears and recriminations, and finally, slowly, the beginning of understanding. They'd been terrified, they explained. Financially ruined, threatened, manipulated into believing they had no choice. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it made it human, forgivable, eventually. I'm proud of you, Clara's father said at the wedding reception, watching his daughter dance with her new husband under string lights that turned the garden into something magical. You found your own way, despite everything we put you through. Clara looked around at the people celebrating with them. Customers who'd become friends, clients who'd become family, neighbors who'd rallied around their little bookstore like it was the heart of the community. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not perfect, not impressive, just real. As the evening wound down and the last guests headed home, Alexander and Clara found themselves alone in their garden, still in their wedding clothes but barefoot now, sharing leftover cake and talking about the future like it was full of nothing but possibilities. No regrets? Alexander asked, thinking about the corporate empire he'd walked away from, the power and prestige he'd chosen to leave behind. Clara looked at him like he'd asked if she regretted breathing. Are you kidding? This is the best plot twist of my life. And as they sat there under stars that seemed brighter than they had any right to be, both of them understood something that all the money and power in the world couldn't teach. Sometimes the greatest revenge against people who tried to destroy you is simply being happy without them. And that's Clara's incredible journey from a runaway bride to a woman who discovered her true strength. But here's the real question I want you to ask yourself right now. What would you have done in Clara's position? Think about it for a moment. When everyone you trusted betrayed you, when your own family sold you out for their own survival, when the world seemed determined to destroy you, would you have had the courage to keep fighting? Or would you have given up and accepted the life others had planned for you? Clara's story isn't just about romance or corporate conspiracy. It's about something much deeper. It's about the moment when you realize that your life belongs to you and nobody else gets to write your story. How many times have you settled for less than you deserve because it seemed easier? How many times have you stayed silent when you should have spoken up? How many times have you let fear make decisions for your life? Clara could have gone home after that wedding. She could have apologized, married Damien, and lived the safe, predictable life everyone expected. But she chose something different. She chose truth over comfort, courage over safety, and love over convenience. And here's what I want you to understand. That same choice is available to you every single day. Maybe you're not facing a deadly conspiracy, but you're probably facing something just as important. The choice between living authentically or living according to other people's expectations. The question isn't whether you'll face storms in your life. You will. The question is whether you'll learn to dance in the rain or spend your whole life waiting for clear skies. So what's your next move going to be? What part of your life needs the kind of courage Clara showed? What relationship, what career, what dream have you been putting off because it felt too risky? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own life and the choices you're making, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Here at Infinite Stories, We believe that every narrative has the power to transform lives. And I'd love to continue sharing these powerful stories with you. Your story is still being written, and trust me, it's far from over. So make sure you're the one holding the pen.